So these are my two people to start with. So this is the Reverend Willie Maxwell, and this is Robert Burns.
Okay.
And I have like a visual. So I got basically all of my information came from Furious Hours by Casey Sepp, because there's a lot of information about this story, but not the actual story, which is, it sounds weird, but I'll tell you why towards the end.
Okay.
So on June 18th, 1977, Robert Burns, who's this guy,
Right.
shot Reverend Willie Maxwell point blank inside the house of Hutchinson Funeral Home in Alexandria City, Alabama.
Ooh.
The Reverend and his wife, Ophelia, were attending the service of Ophelia's foster daughter, Shirley Ann, and she had passed away unexpectedly the previous week.
Okay.
So they were there for her wake.
Mm-hmm.
Reverend Maxwell was killed instantly by Robert Burns' bullets, and Robert Burns immediately surrendered to the two officers that happened to be at the service directing traffic. So he shot him, and he just stood right there and waited for the police officers to come running in and arrest them.
Dude.
I know. It's serious.
The balls.
So the best lawyer, the best lawyer in town stepped in to defend him, and his name is Tom Radney.
Okay.
And I have another picture.
This is like a book report.
So he gets added to the board. Well, I had to do it this way because there's so many people. So new person.
Okay. And he's the attorney, or what was he?
He's the attorney.
Okay.
So he steps in to defend Robert Burns.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. So Mr. Radney had a big task ahead of him. By all accounts, Robert Burns was a completely ordinary man. And after Burns graduated high school, he left his small town in Alabama to head to Cleveland and then to Chicago. In the big cities, he drove a truck and then a city bus. Eventually, he was drafted and served in the 4th Infantry Division during the Vietnam War. When he was discharged from the military, he returned to Alex City, Alabama with his wife, Vera. There, he was helping to raise Vera's teenage son and fostering a severely disabled 7-year-old girl.
Oh.
So I don't know, I cut her off, but they have a little, like, he's a good guy. They're fostering this little girl whose mom had rubella when she was pregnant.
Robert
So
Burns
she's got a lot of,
is that what you just said?
Yeah, Robert Burns is a good guy. Yep.
Yay.
Even though he shot the Reverend, he's actually a good guy.
All right.
So they had moved back to Alabama because they also wanted to be near family, including being an uncle to Shirley Ann, who's the girl that was killed earlier. Ooh. I can actually show you a picture. This is Shirley Ann.
Okay. Okay, Shirley Ann.
Yep. Let's see. When they moved back to Alabama, Robert Burns resumed work as a truck driver and was on the road the night he got a call that Shirley Ann had died. So Tom Radney, the attorney, eventually entered a not guilty plea due to insanity from PTSD.
So
which was very,
he was upset about Shirley Ann. Is that?
He was upset about, they're saying he was upset about Shirley Ann. And then there's a lot of backstory that relates to the PTSD because there's not just one incident.
Okay.
So Mr. Burns' trial only lasted 2 days. The jury agreed with Tom Radney and returned a not guilty by reason of insanity verdict.
Oh, wow.
Robert Burns was committed to Bryce Hospital on September 28, 1977, and released before Thanksgiving that year. So he's only there a couple weeks.
Okay.
So what would make this sane man go insane and do this and shoot this Reverend?
Yes.
So now we have to find out who the Reverend was to figure out why he did this.
Okay.
So Willie Maxwell Jr. was born in May of 1927. He was the 6th of 9 children. There's not a lot about his early childhood because they didn't actually, unfortunately, he was born in a time when they didn't record a lot about people of color. It was kind of the big thing at the time. So we don't know if he had any of the, like, we don't know if his parents were abusive. We don't know if he had any early signs of anything.
Okay.
So he received about 7 years of formal education, And he basically only went to school around harvest time. So if harvest was happening, he didn't go to school.
Wow.
Which was actually very normal for the area.
Yeah.
So the kids wouldn't go to school when harvest time was happening.
Okay. They needed
at 18, they needed the help. At 18, he enlisted in the military, and after 4 years, voluntarily discharged with a Good Conduct Medal. And he returned home to Alabama at 21 and married Mary Lou Edwards. So we'll add Mary Lou to the board because there's not a picture of her.
Aww.
But you have to have the body count. So
Okay. Yeah, that helps. That's who he's married to.
That's who he's married to.
Okay.
So the first 5 years of their marriage, the Maxwells worked as sharecroppers. And eventually Maxwell and his wife quit the sharecropping, and Willie Maxwell started into rotation of jobs he would have for the rest of his life: powdering, pulpwooding, and preaching. Say that 3 times fast.
Wow.
Yeah. I'd never heard of pulpwooding before this, so.
What is it?
Powdering, pulpwooding.
What is that?
I'll tell you in a minute. Okay, so powdering involves drilling several feet into rock and placing blasts in the hole to blow the rock into smaller pieces.
Okay.
And so they drill this big hole down and then drop the fertilizer charges, is what they call them, down in the hole and blow it up because they want the rock for smaller pieces.
Okay.
And then pulpwooding was also a laborious task. It involved cutting down trees with saws. So this is all by hand.
Wow.
They would cut down trees with saws, delimb the trees, which is a really fun word.
Delimb?
Delimb.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that more often now.
That's how when I went to cut down my tree, we're going to go delimb the Christmas tree.
Exactly. Cut the logs into section and then load the sections onto a truck and deliver them. So both of these jobs involved a lot of dirt, dust, and sweat, but Maxwell would have none of it. As soon as the job was done, he would clean up head to toe, not just wipe the grime and dirt off, but changed into a 3-piece suit, tie, and polished shoes.
Oh.
Men always looked on in astonishment as Mr. Maxwell would deliver the daily load of wood in his fresh pressed suit.
Wow.
So this was like a big thing about him. He would not go anywhere without looking his best.
Mm-hmm.
As for the preaching, he was ordained in 1962. He was awarded a certificate of theological study from Selma University in 1970. At the start of his career as a reverend, one of his parishioners commented, "He could pray a prayer that could make this house move."
Oh.
His style made him one of the most sought-after preachers in the area for revivals and speaking. So revivals, you're from up north, so I don't know if you know it as much, but the revivals were like kind of a really big deal in the South, and you'd go and you'd spend the weekend at these revivals, and you'd have guest preachers come in, and lots of blessings and lots of holy this, and it was meant to pump up the parishioners in a church so that they were more engaged in the church activities. And it was really big during the summer.
Okay.
So it was like kind of how to get through the lull of the summer.
Okay. Makes sense.
Let's see. Although Reverend Maxwell was very busy between his weekday jobs and weekend sermons, the Maxwells struggled financially. During this time, Mary Lou worked with her husband at Russell Mills, and she worked from home as a laundress and a seamstress for her neighbors. But even with a 2-income household, they owed several debts. Maxwell owed thousands to banks. He was behind in car payments, and they had a very large mortgage. And he also owed on several accounts at local small businesses in town. So like the little mom and pop shops where you could set up credit.
Yeah.
He owed a bunch to those too.
Yeah.
Several years into the marriage, Mary Lou also started dealing with women calling the house asking to speak to the Reverend.
Uh-oh.
If Mary Lou would say he wasn't home, they would question her, asking, was she just trying to keep them from speaking to him? So they got pretty nasty with her.
Okay.
And if there was any question as to what this could mean, in January of 1970, Reverend Maxwell went to court to legitimize a 6-week-old baby girl as his own.
Wait, what? Whose was it?
Yeah. One of the girls in town. Yeah.
So was he like open about this?
It was very well known in town. Apparently, some of the debts that were owed were like he would buy cars for women.
Oh. I wonder how
Yeah.
the wife feels about that.
She actually she's quoted as saying, "When you get married for life."
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was one of those things. So on August 3rd, 1970, Mary Lou was home. Hold on. Was home when one of her sisters stopped by. Mary Lou was visibly upset, but would only share that Mr. Maxwell had lost his job at the mill earlier that day, but she'd not had a chance to speak to her husband yet, as he'd gone to preach at a revival near Auburn. Mary Lou also spoke to her neighbor. Okay, this is my favorite too. Her neighbor, Dorcas Anderson.
What, you like her name?
I like her name.
Yeah.
She spoke to Dorcas twice that evening. The first was to tell her that the Reverend was at a revival, and he asked her to stay off the phone in case he needed to reach her.
Oh.
The time was a little after 10 p.m. Mary Lou, again upset, told Dorcas that the Reverend had phoned her to say he had been in a car accident and that he needed her to come pick him up. So Dorcas sees Mary Lou hop in her car to drive off to go pick up the Reverend.
Okay.
That night, Mary Lou's car was found on the side of Highway 22.
Uh-oh.
The car's headlights were on and the car was running. Her body was found inside the car. So a little bit of a trigger warning here because it gives some details.
Oh.
Her hands and chest, her hands, arms, and chest were covered in blood. Her face was covered in lacerations. Her jawbone was chipped and part of her left ear was found in the back seat. There was also blood on the outside. I know. Yeah, she was hit hard enough that it ripped off her ear.
No.
There was also, yeah.
Oh.
There was also blood on the outside of the car. They found some on the passenger door, windshield, and rear window. The police collected samples from the car, including fibers from the interior, a claw hammer from the back seat, and an empty Kleenex box. The police also walked along the roadside looking for any footprints. At a nearby church, the police collected samples of blood drops found in the driveway. The blood drops were later tested and found to be Mary Lou's blood type.
Okay.
When the body was examined by the local coroner, samples and evidence were collected and shared with the Department of Toxicology and Criminal Investigations at Auburn University, which was actually a really big deal at the time. Actually, part of why the university had set up the department was because of a lot of wrongful convictions of Black men in the South. And it was kind of like convict now, investigate later.
Yeah.
It was kind of the attitude. So
Yeah.
they set up the crime lab to help to be able to clear some of these guys and clear some of these cases and get the right guys in jail.
Positive thing that somebody put
together.
Yeah,
It was really, and it was really advanced for its time.
Yeah.
It was noted that a half-inch dark bruise with ligature marks was around Mary Lou's neck. Also, grains of sand and bits of leaves were found in her mouth. More sand and leaves were found in the blood stains on her dress. Also, the dress had grease spots on its midline and hemline. Both the coroner and Department of Toxicology and Criminal Investigation agreed that Mary Lou was first strangled, and when that didn't kill her, she'd been beaten to death.
Wow.
So the point that why they noted the evidence was to prove that she was outside of the car, and she got these grease stains and dirt and stuff on her.
It was like she was set up to look like a car accident.
Yeah, originally it was set up to look like a car accident, but then when they looked, they proved that she'd been outside of the car.
Okay.
She was placed back inside of her car, and the car was then driven a short distance down the highway and pulled off to the side where it had been found. During the investigation into the physical evidence at the scene, no rope or ligature had been found. The police went to inform Reverend Maxwell of his wife's death and learn more about the movements of the Maxwells that evening. Reverend Maxwell explained that Reverend Maxwell explained that when he finished at the revival, he began driving home, but had stopped at a service station to buy a soda and phone his wife to say he was on his way home. He claimed that Mary Lou did not answer this call. The Reverend arrived home around 11 p.m. and noticed that his wife was not there. But he was so exhausted from the revival, he was too tired to investigate any further at that point and immediately fell asleep. So he came home, his wife's not there, and he was just too tired from the revival, so he went to bed.
Okay.
He woke up around 2 a.m. and became concerned that his wife was not home. He called his mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and the neighbor, Dorcas, to inquire if Mary Lou was there. None of them knew where she was, and then he called the police to report her missing. When the police searched the home, they found that the burn barrel had recently been used. The evidence inside was analyzed, but the only items that could be identified were a cloth with a hem and something that had a basket weave pattern, like a straw hat or a lady's handbag. So they couldn't pass that. They couldn't tell anything more, but they knew that the fire had been recent.
Okay.
When, the police also interviewed the neighbor Dorcas. Not only did she relay the earlier story about Mary Lou leaving to pick up the Reverend from an accident, but she also told the police that she had not noticed the Reverend coming home earlier in the evening. In fact, she had not heard his car or seen his headlights coming into the driveway. When she had received the phone call at 2 a.m., she'd gone over to the Maxwell's house, and was astonished that there was no damage on the Reverend's car. So when she walked over, she stopped to look at his car, and she thought, that's weird. There's nothing wrong with his car. But but Mary Lou had gone to.
I wonder if he just assumed, if he's telling his wife to do this thing, that she has no one else around her to witness where she was going.
Right, that she wouldn't say anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the Reverend Maxwell was asked about this accident, he explained it away, saying that there just was a misunderstanding because Mary Lou had been in the accident. So he was saying, oh no, Dorcas just got confused. There was an accident, but it was Mary Lou's accident.
Then why would she be on her way? He's just like saying,
he didn't have a reason for her not to be home.
Yeah. He's just like basically
he didn't have a good reason.
You're crazy. You're misremembering the story.
Well, it gets better.
Okay.
So almost a year later, so on August 6th, so it's a year and 3 days later, Reverend Maxwell was actually indicted in the death of his wife. He was not the only one to be charged. A lady friend was alleged to have helped him ambush Mary Lou and or help move her car to where it was eventually found. Since there was not a lot of physical evidence connecting the Reverend to the scene, the prosecution was relying heavily on eyewitness testimony, including that of Dorcas Anderson. When the trial commenced and Dorcas was placed under oath, she claimed not to recall any of her previous statements, essentially providing an alibi for Reverend Maxwell. Due to lack of physical evidence and without any testimony tying him to the scene, Reverend Maxwell was acquitted. With his acquittal in hand, the Reverend, with the assistance of his defense attorney, Tom Radney. So Tom Radney actually comes into the story earlier because he is the Reverend's defense attorney, and he's going to be his attorney for other things.
Okay.
Let's see. Was able to finish, with the help of his attorney, Tom Radney, he was able to finish out his other court cases, his civil cases. He had filed lawsuits against multiple life insurance companies that had refused to pay based on the fact that the Reverend Maxwell had been charged with his wife's murder. Now that he was legally found to not be guilty of her death, there was no reason blocking the companies from paying the policy benefits, including a policy he had purchased just the month before his wife had been killed. Like, he hadn't even had time to pay the first premium on it. Wow. Yeah. So you may be asking, what would make a witness change their testimony? There are stories of witnesses being threatened. Maybe a witness gets paid to change their testimony. Experts say all the time memory is flawed, and maybe Dorcas honestly forgot. But I assure you, one element is more powerful than all of the other: love. Dorcas and Reverend Maxwell were married November 21st, 1971, 15 months after the death of his first wife.
What the heck?
Yeah.
What is it about this guy?
So now Dorcas is our purple lady, and she's his second wife.
Oh my God. Okay.
So Dorcas had been married at the time of Willie Maxwell's trial. She had 2 young sons at home and was caring for her husband, who had been diagnosed with ALS. Oh. Although her husband had been told he would live for several years with his diagnosis, he passed in just a couple months. The grieving couple had a lot in common, including the loss of spouses, young children, and their faith. It was no wonder they ended up falling in love so quickly. It was around this time the rumors of voodoo started to make their way out of the shadows and onto the lips of the people in town. Members of Coosa County told each other stories of the Reverend Maxwell traveling to New Orleans to study voodoo with the Seven Sisters. Did they come up in your research?
The Seven Sisters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. A friend of a friend would swear they saw white chickens hung upside down in the pecan tree outside of his house. Or somebody would mention how a distant cousin saw him painting blood on his doorsteps to keep the authorities away. Due to his knowledge and power, he was able to trick Dorcas into falling in love with him. He used talismans and deadly powders to kill her husband. The good people of Coosa County knew he had used voodoo to fix the jury and cause his wife's death. The thing they were most certain of was that the Reverend Maxwell was not a person to cross. So now the townsmen have spoken about him and said, he's a bad guy and he's using voodoo to protect himself. So nobody wants to mess with him now. In February 1972, tragedy struck the Maxwell family again. Willie's brother, John Columbus Maxwell, JC, I get to add another buddy. He's my green guy.
Okay.
This is kind of crazy. I've never heard of such, when we get to the evidence, it's crazy. Let's see. JC was found dead on the side of the road at the intersection of Highway 22 and Highway 9. And if you remember, his wife was on Highway 22.
Wait, this
originally
was their son?
This is his brother. This is the Reverend's brother.
Okay.
Yep. Originally, an anonymous caller phoned to tell the police that a person was struck by a car and was laying dead on the side of the road. When the police arrived to the scene, the body did not appear to have been hit. In fact, there were no visible injuries to the body. The only anomalies the police noted on scene was the fact that the body was cold and reeked of alcohol. So they found the body. Somebody called in and said, oh, somebody got hit. He's laying on the side of the road. And when the police got there, they're like, nothing's wrong with this guy. He's just laying on the side of the road dead. So again, the local coroner sent samples to the Department of Toxicology and Criminal Investigation. JC's blood alcohol level was found to contain 0.41% ethyl alcohol.
Ooh.
A life-threatening range. Like, that's insane. That's like half your blood being alcohol.
Oh my God.
Cause of death was a heart attack caused by the overconsumption of alcohol. While his death may have been a loss to his family, it definitely was a gain to Willie Maxwell's pockets, who just happened to be listed as the beneficiary on his brother's life insurance policies. On September 20th, 1972, 3 men came across a car idling with its lights on, sitting just to the edge of the road. The men got out to investigate and saw a woman on the floor of the front seat, motionless. The men raced back to town and called the police. When the police arrived, they noted a small amount of damage to the front right of the car, but nothing that significantly affected the car. The person in the car was Dorcas Anderson Maxwell. So first wife's dead, now second wife is dead, and brother's dead.
Okay.
In less than 2 years.
Yeah. This guy's a piece of work.
Another Maxwell was sent to the local funeral home. The autopsy revealed a large cut above Dorcas's right eye, small abrasions on her shoulders and elbows, and a fractured hyoid. The coroner attributed the fractured hyoid to something that can normally happen during autopsies. Therefore, it was not the cause of death, which I'd never heard before.
Yeah.
So they're saying, so her hyoid was fractured, but they're saying, oh, it just happens during autopsy.
Yeah, like somebody was that rough, like pushing on it. Yeah, I don't know.
Let's see. The explanation for how she ended up on the side of the road was Dorcas had succumbed to acute respiratory distress. So basically they said she had an asthma attack, passed out, and died, drove her car off the side of the road.
Okay.
Reverend Willie Maxwell had more tragedy, grief, bad luck, and loss than any one man deserved, but then again, he also had more love than any one man deserved. In November of 1974, he was blessed yet again with another true love of his life, and he married his third wife, Ophelia Burns. So we have Ophelia.
Oh my gosh. How are these women like, you sound like a nice man.
Yeah. So this is Ophelia.
Okay. It's his third wife.
So this is his third wife. And you bring up a very good question about why people were falling in love with him.
Uh-oh.
It says, now you may be asking, what type of woman would marry a man with such bad luck with wives? Ophelia Burns was the lady friend that was charged as an accessory in his first wife's murder. She was very aware of who Reverend Maxwell was. So
Okay.
she was the one that was charged an accessory, saying that either she helped attack Mary Lou, the first wife, or at minimum she helped put her in the car and drive the car to the other site.
Wow. Okay.
So by this time, the rumors of voodoo, life insurance, and murder had become too much for the people to handle, and the Reverend was forced into retirement and instead took his seat with the congregation on Sundays. So nobody would allow him to preach anymore.
What was he teaching? Like, if he's practicing voodoo on the side, is he also a preacher of voodoo? What is he?
It was, so the rumors were that he had a voodoo room in his house.
Yeah.
And that he was practicing ceremonies for voodoo out of his house.
Mm-hmm.
But he would, during the weekends, he would go to those revivals and preach the gospel.
Okay.
So very much contradicted itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe Willie Maxwell himself had been cursed to have death and pain follow him wherever he went. Maybe that was his lot in life for past transgressions, cursed to eternal sadness and the loss of his loved ones. Yes, there is another loss of a loved one.
Oh, no.
On February 16th, 1976, the body of James Hicks was found inside a car on the shoulder of Highway 9, which was where his brother had been found.
Oh my God. He can't even get creative with the spot?
No.
Cursed.
If it works for you.
Yeah.
Hicks was 22 years old and the son of one of Maxwell's older sisters. A medical examiner from the crime lab came down to perform the autopsy. So I have another body now.
Okay, this is his sister's kid.
Yep. So he's the uncle. So we've got wife, brother, nephew.
What a jerk.
Let's see. Oh wait, this one's really funny though. Like for cause of death. Let's see. Hicks was only 22 years old at the time. Let's see. A medical examiner came down from the crime lab to perform the autopsy. Cause of death, nothing.
No.
Exactly worded. Yeah, exactly worded. So exactly worded on the sheet.
Nothing.
There was nothing that would adequately account for the death of this subject.
What?
Although others would go on to argue that they did have a cause of death and it was in Hicks' belongings, an insurance policy written in Willie Maxwell's own handwriting.
Okay.
So he had taken out an insurance policy on his nephew. Apparently he took out insurance policies on everybody.
What is taking people so long to say something, like to call this guy out? I don't get it.
Well, they tried on the first one and he was acquitted because he married the star witness.
Okay, yeah.
So skip forward just a little bit of time. Ophelia and Willie Maxwell had so Ophelia is the third wife. Ophelia and Willie Maxwell had a large blended family, including a young son that he had with Dorcas. So Dorcas had actually just given birth like 6 months before she was killed.
No.
So she left behind a little baby.
Oh my God.
So he's got his baby, and Ophelia had previous children by marriage, and others they had adopted formally or informally, including, in this mix, was 16-year-old Shirley Ann.
Okay.
So that's where we started.
Right.
Was they were at the wake for Shirley Ann.
Okay.
Like most teenagers, Shirley Ann. So now we're just back to this girl.
Okay.
And this is her mom. So this is her mom, and this is Shirley Ann.
Oh boy, they had adopted her though.
Yeah,
Okay.
It was like a cousins of a cousin kind of thing, and they had taken her in.
Okay.
So let's see. So Shirley Ann's 16. Like most teenagers, Shirley Ann was coming into her own and boundaries. She wasn't as interested in family activities and rather spend time with her friends. The second Saturday of June, 1977, Shirley Ann spent the day running around with her mother and felt like she'd earned some freedom for the evening. Against her mother's wishes, Shirley Ann took off in the car for the evening to spend time with her friends. As night set in and Shirley Ann had not returned, her mother became concerned, and for good reason. Before the night was over, the police contacted Ophelia to meet them on the side of Highway 9. This is becoming a running pattern for the highways. Yeah. So back to Highway 9.
Right.
They had found Shirley Ann.
Oh, no.
Yeah. William Maxwell and Ophelia rushed to the scene. The Reverend was not allowed to approach the car, but you could still tell what had happened. It appeared as if Shirley Ann had put the car on a jack to change a flat tire, and the car had slipped off and fallen on her.
Oh, wow.
At least that's what it looked like from a distance. Close up, you could see the details of the picture were not correct. First, the tire that she was supposedly changing was not flat.
Okay. Wow.
Detail. Yeah. Second, Shirley Ann's hands had no grease on them, and it's that's impossible if you've ever tried to change a tire. Also, the lug nuts were pinned underneath the car, not beside the body like one would normally do. So you know how like you take the lug nuts off and you set them on the ground next to you? They were actually tucked up underneath the car.
Okay.
So yeah, no bueno.
Yeah.
And it was funny because the book specifically talks about this too. And it says also, what teenager has ever changed a tire in the history of teenagers?
Yeah, that's
not happening.
So many red flags.
Especially she was less than a mile from home.
No.
Yeah. So the colloquial definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. For Reverend Maxwell, he became a professional at doing the same thing over and over and getting the same result. Step 1, take out a life insurance policy on a loved one. Step 2, wait for something unfortunate to happen. Step 3, collect the benefits. Robert Burns finally stepped in and broke the cycle. Robert Burns broke the cycle of sanity with his insanity. The people in Reverend Maxwell's family were much safer for it.
Wow.
Over the course of his life, Reverend Maxwell had collected close to $500,000 in life insurance payouts.
Ugh.
And during all of this time, for the criminal cases and the civil cases, he was represented by Tom Radney, who was eventually the same guy who actually represented Robert Burns and got him off on the insanity plea.
Right.
So that was
it comes full circle.
It was such a weird twist.
Yeah.
Like he had represented him for all of this time, and then he gets killed, and he gets the guy off. He actually argued in court that basically the Reverend Maxwell was a bad guy.
He was.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So yeah, so
jerk.
That was like I had all the twists and turns.
Yeah.
This is actually, so this is our body count, and we're missing one if you were to count Dorcas's her first husband, who had the ALS, because he was part of the he had served in the military, so he was getting care through the VA system. And they're like, oh no, you're doing great, this is, you're doing fine. And then like we went in for a checkup, and then within 3 months he died of pneumonia.
So
then they got married.
Did they poison him or something?
They actually did. They did a lot of tests on all of the bodies, and they never found a specific poison. They never found like heavy metals. They never found like a glycol overdose. They never found anything. But they specifically, they had mentioned that they had people coming. They were going to charge Reverend Maxwell with with Shirley Ann's death, for the 16-year-old's death. And they had guys come forward to say, oh, the Reverend Maxwell came to us and asked how dirty we were. And if we were dirty, if we were dirty, could we help him? And they said like he offered to give them part of the money from the life insurance policies when they settled,
Mhm.
and depending on how much work they were willing to help put into the death. And so like if they didn't have to kill the person. He was very comfortable doing that, is what it said.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was never charged with anything, actually.
Oh my
I mean, he was charged with the first murder and acquitted, but he was never charged with any of the other murders. They were going to charge him with the last one, but Robert Burns killed him before he was charged.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The nerve.
So so he had the town like running scared. Nobody was going to, and that was the other thing, because of the voodoo, nobody was going to testify against him and nobody was going to come forward against him. And it was until the very end, when it involved a young girl, nobody was comfortable enough coming forward.
Dang, he had everybody scared.
He had everybody scared.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our stories and were inspired to create something too. Please remember to share your projects with us. We can't wait to see them. Also, please remember to like and subscribe so you get notifications when we post our videos. And until then, remember, create crafts, not crime.